Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today on another episode of Retail Redeveloped. My name is Adam Williams. I'm very excited to be joined today by one David Lemley. He is the president and chief strategist of Retail Voodoo. He's also the author of a new book called Beloved and Dominant Brands, and he's agreed to join me. And as you know, I like to do nerd out a little bit on retail and branding. Now, who is David? Simply put, he helps brands become legendary. He is the president and chief strategist of Retail Voodoo, a U.S.-based brand strategy firm that helps specialty food and beverage brands gain market share by addressing their toughest growth challenges. I'll let him tell you a little bit about the firms that he has worked with in the past, but they're household brands like Kind, Sur La Table, you name it. I mean, the brands just get bigger and bigger. David, thank you so much for joining me today on Retail Redeveloped.
Hey, Adam, I'm happy to be here. I think we're going to have a great conversation.
I think we will as well. David, before we get into the nuts and bolts of brand, marketing, retail, all the things that we want to talk about, would you take just a few minutes and explain to people, who you are, what it is that you do, the why behind why you do it, and really just explain to people how you came to sit in the chair that you're in now.
Sure. So I have been working with all sorts of different brands for many, many years, and I've been fortunate enough to have been in the room when it happened for some that are beloved household names now who are retail monoliths. And so I have taken the opportunity to study deeply customer experience and retail reality and have combined that with a deep understanding of consumer insight. And today I help brands figure out how to become meaningful to people's lives so that they can command preference.
Now, when you talk about brands being meaningful to people's lives, can you pick out anything? What is that kind of common thread that runs through brands? Because I'm sure, I've been in enough kind of marketing charrettes to know that that no matter if you're selling, a high-end cocktail place or a Chuck E. Cheese, there's certain brands that kind of tend to rise to the top. What is it about these brands that you've seen that kind of ties them together?
Well, I think that the ones that really succeed well, who become beloved over a long period of time, are deeply connected to their audience. They understand them in a way that goes far beyond the transaction and gets into anticipation of their need state before the consumer or the audience even realizes they're going to have it. So you mentioned Chuck E. Cheese. Could be an interesting one to talk about. When Chuck E. Cheese is relevant to you as a consumer or as a buyer or as a parent, there's a whole set of need states that you're going to have that their team has done a really great job of anticipating and predicting and scripting what their behavior will be like so that they can help you overcome the challenges you have before you realize you're going to have them. Because again, they have an expertise that they've seen it a million times, even though me as a parent taking a family there or going to a party there, I may have only had 6 or 20 experiences with that brand. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, and I realized that I aged myself instantly when I said Chuck E. Cheese. If you can't tell, I have a 5 and a 7-year-old, and they think that Chuck E. Cheese is about the coolest thing in the world. So how does a brand? I call that kind of your avatar. Like what is the makeup of your customer? How do these brands get in the heads of their customers and figure out that understanding? How does a brand set out to do that? Because especially as a brand is coming up and growing, sometimes they might not even know who their eventual customer is. How does a brand go about really, really dialing that in?
Well, there are two kind of streams of thinking around it. One is to use data and gather insights from that data. So if you have any customers at all, talk to them incentivize them to communicate with you and help them understand how you connect to their lives. And in that collection of data, ask forward-leaning questions so you can start to help invent a future with them and where your brand gains more meaning. So that's one way of getting there. The other way, so it's kind of the yin yang of these two things together become really powerful. The other way is decide why you exist in the world beyond making a profit and what your contribution to society is going to be. And right away, when you do that, you get a whole bunch of, these will never be our customers because we're contributing to society in this way. And if you take that combined with feedback from people who are currently your customers, you will have powerful toolbox to work with.
Now, figuring out why you exist in the world beyond profit, that sounds like an incredible thing for a brand to do, especially if they're in that growth phase. How do you seek out brands that care more about society than a profit? Because I'll be brutally honest with you. I come from a fairly cold-blooded capitalist world of commercial real estate, and saving the world is awesome, but we're Excel spreadsheet driven to a certain extent also. So how do you go about finding these brands, and how many of these brands are just paying lip service to what you're talking about, and how many actually live it and breathe it and embody it?
Well, I think that's a really good question. And I want to say, first off, look, money is like oxygen. You don't got none, you're going to get lightheaded. And business needs capital or you have a hobby. So
right.
I get all that. So all of this said, being spreadsheet savvy and being able to make your books crack and make sure that there's profit, those are incredibly important things. But in the modern world, anybody can get money. It's not about that. But how do you command a premium and how do you command preference when there's a competitive set? That is by having a contribution. So brands, we're finding that this notion of purpose-driven, you've probably heard that vocabulary, that's really what this is about, is helping organizations find their purpose. And what we find is that most of them, except for the original Fortune 50, have taken the time to think about purpose, because they realize that without purpose, they will not, you can only play on price or availability at that point. So distribution or location becomes a factor that you need to have in order to control. Whereas if you have location and you have made a promise to a consumer in a way that they understand that you're keeping it in a way that's meaningful to them, they will seek you out. Let's take Cheesecake Factory. So we're going to go with the cheese theme, apparently. So Chuck E. Cheese, cheesecake. Let's take Cheesecake Factory as, like, they're everywhere. And what's the promise they're making is you're going to get a really great portion size, really great size portion, rather, and you're going to have space. You're going to have the right kind of light. It's going to feel like a family meal. And you can get that promise.
And the menu's going to weigh 25 pounds.
Yeah, exactly. And that's your thing. And so you go, okay, good. Like, they're making a value statement that you're not getting ripped off. It's not hoity-toity. It's good, comfort, edible food in a space that you're going to feel comfortable in. And you can get that in anywhere from Washington, D.C. to downtown Seattle. It's everywhere.
So is it my imagination, or has this purpose-driven, why do you exist beyond profit? What is your company ethos? Has that really come to the forefront recently with kind of the rise of the spending class of millennials and Amazon kind of leveling the playing field for any kind of commodity-based retail purchase? Or has this been around longer and now maybe I'm just noticing it as I become more and more of a retail nerd?
So I think it's been around longer than the Amazon leveling of the playing field and the millennials coming into their spending power. I think that if you back up, like half a click and say, well, Walmart actually created a wave in this too, when people could no longer compete on price because no one can be lowest price except Walmart. So if you were going to try to play in the commodity space, you were going to lose every single time. So I think that people in business are wanting to have their jobs and their capitalism connect to their whole person. And I think that that has been brewing for 15 years or so, where there's this, why can't I have it all? And I think it's because the people who are in power right now are the offspring of the people who made capitalism rock so hard in the 80s. So I think there's a great social study of consumerism and American popular culture that collides at it's hitting the zeitgeist now, where, oh, my business has to have a purpose if I don't want to be a commodity, because humans are now looking to brands to have some sort of personal identity based on value and based upon who they get to be when they're with that brand, the way that previous generations looked to larger family, where they went to school, and the church. And so I think people are paying a lot more attention to brands, and they're trusting them to make decisions and help shape their personal identity in ways that previous generations just simply didn't even think about.
So who do you think, and I'd like to tell you to not kind of go the Homer route and use a brand that you represent, but I'll leave that open. I'll let you make that decision. Who do you think is kind of epitomizing this kind of brand driven ethos? Like who is pulling it off, or who is kind of leading the charge? And it doesn't have to be one group. You can pick a couple, but I'd love to hear from your perspective who is really doing a great job of this.
Well, I think a brand doing a great job of this that is not in our portfolio is Califia Farms. They have done a really good job of being ethos driven. They're out to normalize plant milk as an example, as a way to make an environmental play so that people who love them get two things out of it. So they are wildly profitable and growing like crazy, and they're helping normalize non-dairy for people who have food allergies or who want to make an environmental statement. And so I think that brand is doing a really good job of connecting with humans and having their ethos match what's going on in a wave of popular culture.
I actually love that brand. I have some of their, people are going to make fun of me. I've got some of their coconut almond milk in my refrigerator right now. I use it all the time. They make great product. I've also seen this happen a lot more. Maybe it's a reaction to fast fashion, kind of like a reaction against the H&M, like we're going to get it made as cheaply as we can and get it to your door as cheaply as we can. It seems like, I'm trying to think of a good example, like an Everlane. There seems to be a lot of this new fashion that is trying to capitalize on what you're saying as well. Can you think of any fashion brands that are ticking those boxes for you?
Yeah, I think that Allbirds, the tennis shoe company, is a great example of that. That's super interesting too, because that started out as very fringy, all about making an environmental claim and a fair trade claim and a reusability and sustainability claim. And it was very fringy and very online at first, and it has gone to become they're quickly becoming a retail player across the world, where they are now in lifestyle centers rather than just malls and online. Another one that pops into my head around that is the eyeglasses company Warby Parker. Same deal. They took that play, they took the disruption of that category and kind of a better for you, easier to access, more approachable, lower cost because it was fair, and brought that first to online, and then they are now making themselves known in retail lifestyle centers because they're a cool brand to be part of that whole who I get to be when I'm with you shopping thing.
So do you think that there is a quantifiable extra margin that you could attribute to this kind of ethos-driven brand, or is this more, the cost of doing business? If you don't do this, you're setting yourself up for failure. Is this just kind of the baseline, sign your name to the SATs, or do you think there's only a few people that are doing this and they're going to be able to command a premium?
I think it is quantifiable. I think that brands that are doing it really, really well now have such a leg up on those who are playing catch up. If you think about commanding a premium price, we talked about Kind briefly. Kind has a product that people love and seek out, almost like FedEx or Kleenex, where it's become the verb of the category for bar. And they have that because of their position of do the right thing for your body, your taste buds, and the planet. And it's that simple. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff they have going on as far as their ethos and why they exist underneath that. But people everywhere from all walks of life can connect to that simple promise and make a small incremental change with their life, and they get to be a better person with it. And that company can quantify that being a do-gooder or being a citizen brand, as I like to think about it, has made a huge difference in their world. They did not start out in the Walmart channel. They started out in alt channel and caught people's imagination, and then made specific product that would make sense to go to Walmart. And now they're virtually everywhere.
Yeah, just monstrous. So how can a brand... I want to dig a little bit deeper into, do you have a framework that you like to walk these brands through to discover their avatar, to really understand the customer better than anyone else? Or is it different for every brand? I mean, how do you kind of start people down this path? Because it sounds easy when we're talking about it. Oh, right, just do the right thing, embody this edgy counterculture spirit that you care about everybody, but it's not... If it was easy, every brand would do it. So how do you get people comfortable and moving in the right direction?
Well, so this is a little bit about my book and why I wrote it. My book takes the first model in our multi-model step that we use to walk a brand through, and teaches people how to think about these sorts of things. So instead of not just saying, how can I maximize profit? That's super important. I think we've already established that I am as capitalist as they come, but I have this other thing going on as well, because I believe it will create long-term relevance and preference, which will result in doing the right thing and being a force for good and strong capitalism. So the book goes in and sets these questions for you. Each chapter is really short, and the questions at the end of the chapter are not the kind of questions that a marketing agency asks a brand owner. They're the kind of questions that an internal leadership team asks themselves about how can they get better at this? The questions around why do we exist, and what kind of meaning do we want to have, and what is our legacy? And it all ties it back to money and channel and location and product offering and innovation and all those sorts of things. So you kind of have to think about it. You can't think about it in a laboratory. You have to think about it in real life with your real product capabilities, with your real experiences that you're going to create or optimize, and your real team. And so team enrollment is the first thing that we do.
Yeah, I would love to unpack a little bit more about how you kind of walk these guys down the path. But I want to also talk about kind of what we're seeing with these brands today. How important is it for, let's say, a direct-to-consumer brand, which is a huge thing in retail today? How important is it for them to understand who they're going after, and how essential do you think it is as they grow from not just another, I spent 10 grand on Instagram trying to sell T-shirts, to getting to that first step of Warby Parker? Obviously, Warby's a case study that everybody knows, but think about Warby, when they took the plunge and opened that first brick and mortar store. Like what would you tell somebody on that level?
I would say that direct to consumer 2-3 years ago was a different beast than it is today. 2 to 3 years ago, the pioneers got a leg up, and they could test and learn, and for very reasonable investments get a lot of traction because it was new and only early adopters were patronizing DTC. So today, I think it's a little bit different. Now, because the barriers to entry are so low, I think anybody with a garage and the ability to mix some stuff together or a screen printed t-shirt can have a direct-to-consumer brand. But to be something that is relevant and people share and that you actually make real dollars doing, you need to have an omnichannel strategy. And thinking about like Warby Parker and that big bold move of when do we go from strictly DTC to out into the world where we get to be seen as a lifestyle by people and have brand affinity when they walk by our store or by our location. That is something where you have such a bigger opportunity in the physical world, even in the middle of quarantine. You have a bigger opportunity in the physical world because people are hungry for meaning. They're hungry for the physicality of it. And it's a different ballgame than direct to consumer, because in direct to consumer, you have somebody who's only reading your stuff if they have identified your need based on an algorithm around features and benefits. So it's a totally different setup.
You know, I've heard, you know, obviously I talk to a lot of people that are on the bleeding edge of this. And I heard something very interesting the other day that I'd like to get your opinion on. A gentleman mentioned that he thinks in 7 to 10 years, and he actually said he thinks it's going to get pushed forward and accelerated because of COVID-19 that we're dealing with right now, that there will be no delineation between the different omni channels, right? Like there's not going to be, a customer won't even think about when they actually made the purchase. Was it on their laptop, on their phone, in a physical store? Was it from a text message? Was it from, you know, an email message? Like a customer won't even think about it because it's going to be so seamless, and all of their buying processes are going to be so flexible. Do you feel as bullish about the blurring of lines?
I do feel as bullish about the blurring of lines for those brands and those products that are lifestyle focused. And the poster child for this bullishness is REI. And REI was a client of mine a long, long time ago. They now have a new management team in place, and it's actually third generation since we worked with them, and they are smarter than smart. But we've talked about this particular thing recently, that I don't distinguish when I go get my kayak shipped to me because I bought it off my phone, but I still went to the store to go smell the plasticky coolness and be around other people who love kayaks. And I'm oversimplifying it, but it's about understanding when humans are going to want to interface with you upon multiple ways. So, there's something about going to the location and seeing the size of a kayak and pretending to be in it, or figuring out what life vest you're going to wear, or how it goes with your hat, or whatever it is that you're doing. All of that happens in a physical space. Then you take that emotional good feeling to your digital experience, and you get all that emotion with it. So as a consumer, when I finally click spend and buy my kayak and it ships to my house, I don't think about any of the channel. I just think about the brand and how smart they were.
You know, I've also heard it said many times by some of the same people that I mentioned that the brick and mortar store is going to be so much less about I walk in, I buy kayak, right? It's the brands that are going to continue to succeed and grow are going to be the ones that concentrate so much on the experience of visiting that store that they are sucking people into their brand ecosystem, right? Like you and I both, I love REI. I think it's a great store. they have so much brand loyalty because of the experience that they're allowed to get you. They're not making any money on that freaking giant rock wall that probably cost $50,000 to put into their store, right? But it's all a part of that, of the experience that they can create. And I think that what is fascinating to me are some of the sales as a service or retail as a service places that are popping up now, like Beta and Neighborhood Goods and Naked and places like that, that they don't even care if you buy anything in the store, right? Like, we just want you to experience the product and, you know, tell your buddy about it, sign up for the email, let us hit you on the right day when you just made a little bit of money, and we hit you with a 20% off coupon and you buy. So it's amazing to watch this transformation for how retail is changing at Lightspeed.
It is changing at Lightspeed. It makes me think of kind of a fun little story. I have been doing this for a long time, and I used to sneak a camera in, and I, at one point, prided myself on having been kicked out of the best retailers across the country for photographing their in-store experience. Because
I knew I should have done a background check before the podcast started.
Yeah, exactly. So now I'm in the same places taking photographs, and it's a whole different world because the organization has recognized that it is an omni-channel experience. And for all they know, I'm shopping for their product, or I'm cost comparing, or I'm Instagramming a picture I took of their store because I love that jacket. So it has changed dramatically. And I've seen that shift just in the last, I have someone who's been on my staff for 4 years who, when she first got here, I was still getting kicked out of stores. And now here we are, and I can't get kicked out to save my life.
You could. I mean, you just got to work a little harder. You got to keep pushing the envelope.
Yeah, like video, or maybe like eating out of the packages. I don't know, something.
Exactly.
I'll come up with something.
Yeah, I'll send you some suggestions. So we're talking a lot about kind of the pretty girls of the dance right now, the DTC brands and the emerging brands. Let's go back. So I understand that a long time ago you worked with this tiny little fledgling company that uses a mermaid logo and sells coffee. What would you talk to me a little bit about what a legacy brand? So your Nikes, your Starbucks, groups like that. How can they? I'd love to understand like how you got them to help define their brand, and then what they can still do to continue to push the envelope, to continue to connect with people, and to continue to stay relevant. I think Nike, for instance, just does an insanely good job at staying relevant for such an older legacy brand.
Yeah, they do an amazing job, and it's because they have underneath Nike, there is a reason to be that almost nobody knows about, and once you hear it, you say, well, duh, that's of course what it is about. And Nike is about victory. It's the goddess of victory is the name, but the whole idea was Nike wants to, as a brand, fight inequality, racism, sexism, poverty, and they wanted to take all of the problems and say, through your own body and your own willpower, you can remove all excuses. If you have a body, you're an athlete, and if you work that way, you can be whatever you want to be. So that's the underlying thing inside of Nike. And as I talk about it, you think about how they communicate today, they're able to take pockets or cohorts of modern audiences and whisper in their ear about their world. And that's powerful. And because they are able to, they have reach, and they have what I call operational significance and capital to do whatever they wish to, they're able to go in and make a really cool hooch store in Manhattan and then switch it up and do something completely different over here. And I think that localization, hyper-localization, combined with understanding how your original promise connects your gear to their lifestyle is huge, and they never stop.
Yeah, they certainly keep pushing the envelope. It's amazing.
And if you think about any brand who's really doing great things, they're not stopping. They don't ever sit back and say, okay, we're doing it the same way we did it 20 years ago, and there's no need to change. It's about innovation and creating experiences where people long to interact with you as a brand.
So let's talk specifically about Starbucks. How did you work with them to help define their brand, and how have you seen them change, over the last 20 years?
Okay. So I was going to say, to like set it up. I have a 23-year-old who was born in the middle of the project, so he is exactly the same age as the strategy. Um, but what I want to say is that I was super lucky. I got brought in by very smart people. Starbucks, being brilliant, brought in somebody who was one of the key marketers of Nike and somebody who was a key architect of experiences at Disney. And together I was lucky enough to be brought in by them. So I was in a think tank. And at that point, you have to realize the B on branding was lowercase. What's a brand? Branding, what is it? It was all murky. It meant scarring a cow, and marketers were throwing it around, but nobody really understood what it was. And these guys were so smart. They hired these world-class, world-famous interior designers and customer experience designers and graphic designers to create these stores. And they were gorgeous, but they were expressions of each of those agencies or each of those interior designers. And they brought us in and said, we want to build something that transcends culture, and we want to change the culture of starting with America and then the globe, what they think of coffee. And all of them were pretty, but there was nothing where you could go in and interact, if you will. It was more like being in a museum. And so we started there, and I was lucky enough to be in the room when Scott Bedbury whiteboarded the third place. And so from there, a whole bunch of things happened. And again, so I can't take credit for it, but what I can tell you is very smart people test and learn, never rest on your laurels. And to that end, what I ended up doing is, rather than going, woo, I just helped work on the coolest thing ever, I got really scared and I went back to school. So I studied business leadership and management in order to be able to codify what we did there. And I built a map, and we've used that map ever since. Here's who needs to be in the boat. Here's what they need to know. Here's what the dollars need to look like. Here's what the timelines need to look like. Here's where the stage gates are. And here's how we go build a brand that can change the world and never stop.
So if you were, obviously, it's hard to put a bow on, how do you build a brand that won't ever stop growing, and that you can continue to evolve over the course of customers' lifetimes. But if you had to nail down, the biggest thing to keep in mind, or the biggest thing to avoid at all cost, it can be either. What would you say?
The biggest thing to avoid at all costs is thinking that a campaign of any sort is your brand. Advertising's function is to get people to think about your brand at all, but it is not your promise. It is not the way in which you keep the promise. It's supposed to be provocative, but it should be campaignable and not be. That's why they should change frequently, and you should have energy. So the difference between advertising, marketing, and brand, that's the biggest mistake we see, is thinking that I just need a really cool campaign and that'll fix my brand. Or I just need smarter marketing channels and that'll fix my brand. And those are both outcomes that happen during the activation part of something. Brand is really about that kind of deeper thinking about who you are, why you exist, how you're going to make a profit, what contribution you're going to make, and then to turn that into a business plan that you're going to do those other things against.
So do you often see people getting the cart before the horse? They come up with some whiz-bang marketing campaign and haven't really figured out who they are and who they want to be when they grow up?
Yeah, we see it all the time.
So tell us. Let's go back to the book a little bit. Obviously, this is a passionate story for you. If I'm a marketer, or if I'm someone that's deeply passionate about brands, or maybe I'm someone that's trying to figure out how to launch a new brand, what can I expect to take away from your book? What strategies? What can I kind of tease out of that book that's going to make me a little bit smarter than when I started it? Which is a low bar, but still.
Just a little bit smarter. Well, okay, so I'll tell you why I wrote the book and why it's written in the fashion it is. So I wrote the book because I wanted to help establish a common vocabulary between people who are building brands, people who are funding brands, and people who are marketing brands. And so that's leadership, investors, marketers, and entrepreneurs. Get them all to have literally on the same page by having the same vocabulary that is not from the MBA program, but is really simple and straightforward. So the book is written, and I have an editor that I worked with who helps me do this to make sure that a fifth grader would understand every word in the book. So if we're going for that low bar,
Perfect.
How we
Thank
get
God.
smarter if the book was written to be understood by a fifth grader. And it's because we wanted to take all the marketing speak and all the hyperbole out of it and just speak plain English so that you can understand it, whether you were an expert. And the feedback I've gotten is people inside of Pepsi have said things like, "Oh my gosh, you wrote a book it was so thin that I read the whole thing on a flight from here to here. So it's a 2-hour read. And I didn't think I was going to get anything out of it. And I can't stop thinking about question 42 in chapter 6 because I never thought that question." So what I'm hearing from everyone is that one of the questions at the end of these simple 7 chapters in this book will be a question that will make you reconsider what you're doing as a brand.
That's really powerful. So how if you could get a brand or someone to take one actionable step out of your book, obviously there's 50, but if there was one step that you would say, listen, the whole book is important, but if you take nothing away, I need you to listen to X, what would that be?
I think it's about, for the audience that we're talking to today, I think it's about curation. Thinking about your why is one important thing, but then thinking about the relationships you have. If you are the retailer, what are you curating for your experience for people to come into? And if you're the brand trying to get on the shelf of the retailer, how are you helping them curate? Because the future belongs to curated experiences.
I could not agree with that more. We spend a tremendous amount, or I try to spend a tremendous amount of time with my clients, having them understand how important curation is, because I work on larger retail centers and giving people a reason to get out from in front of their screen and come out and visit you is harder and harder. And if you're not obsessive about curation, to the point sometimes where you're a little bit more worried about amenitizing the overall project as opposed to getting that last dollar on your pro forma, you're setting yourself up for success over the long term, as opposed to just something looking good on a lease or on a spreadsheet and then falling apart in the real world.
Yeah, I agree with you completely that if you're thinking a little bit longer term, this spreadsheet will take care of itself. If you're curating properly and you are doing it in a way that actually makes you a little nervous each time you do it, then you know you're doing the right thing.
Well, David, you've already been extremely generous with your time. Before we start to wrap up, would you please tell everybody how they can engage with you, how they can learn more, how they can obviously find a copy of the book? Explain to people how you want to interact and interface with them.
Sure. Well, so my company is called Retail Voodoo. You can Google that, find us on the website. There's a way to, you can actually download a chapter of the book there to read if you like. If you want to buy it, the book is available on Amazon. That's fantastic. If you love it, leave a great review. If you don't love it, please don't leave a review.
Just keep it to yourself if you don't love it. Nobody cares about your opinion anyway.
Exactly. Nobody cares. I'm clear on that. So another thing that I would say is I use LinkedIn as a network. I post a lot of content there. So if you're curious about what we're doing, look me up on LinkedIn and connect.
So I'm going to hit you with a couple quick, just stream of consciousness kind of questions.
I'll try to not blow it.
No, don't screw this up. We've had a great interview. I really need you to keep it together for the last couple minutes. So, what technology has had the greatest impact on you as a brand strategist and marketer?
Oh, the technology that has had the greatest impact on me is the ability to take what I'm going to go to data, actually, the ability to get data and vet whether it's good or not in a matter of days to weeks that used to take months to years. So let me explain that a little bit. So it used to be when we wanted to know what the usage and attitude on a brand was, we would conduct a certain kind of a study and people would go into the field and there'd be focus groups in multiple cities. You'd ask all the questions and people would sit behind glass and watch, and it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and take a long time. And then it would be iterative and you might not actually get anything deeply meaningful out of it. We can have that same kind of thing happen over the course of 6 weeks digitally, vet the caliber of who we're talking to, get both qualitative and quantitative data out of it, and bring insights to brands that they couldn't get their hands on before. And so we're able to make decisions much more quickly.
A very smart person told me on this podcast that there's a data arms race right now, and Facebook, call it Facebook, Instagram, something like that, knows kind of who you are. Amazon knows what you buy, and whoever can figure out how to kind of bridge those two gaps in the data is going to be in an extremely advantageous place.
Yes. And I think that's happening all around us in fits and starts. And the example that I love is there's a cartoonist by Tom Fishburne called The Marketunist. And there's an Alexa in the corner, and it's talking something about seeing the waffle pattern in the data. And Alexa comes back and says, here are 15 Waffle Houses located near you. And it's just because it's always listening. I think that there's a lot more movement on that front than we are aware.
Yeah, and I've also heard it said that those Amazon Go stores, I mean, they don't care if you ever buy anything out of that store. They're a giant case study on consumer behavior. They're just gathering data at a massive, massive pace.
Yeah, and it's fantastic. And if you go in and you know what you're looking at because you've been on the backside of retail, you can understand there's a camera there and there's a this there, and there's a sensor every time I touch that or think about that or stall, it's focused the camera on my face. It's all happening in there. So I agree. It is a laboratory. And I do think that they're going to figure it out. And I do think that will become how Whole Foods evolves.
All right, got another question for you. What are some of or the biggest myth you've encountered around branding?
Biggest myth. So the biggest myth that we encounter regularly still to this day is that our trade dress and our look and feel is our brand. I know that so many people have said it, your brand's not your logo, your brand's not this, but that really understanding what brand is, that people have confusion around what a brand is versus branding and the brand. So a brand is a promise and the way you choose to keep it, and how I feel about the way you kept the promise in my gut, just below my heart, that's your brand. And then branding is the act of making me aware of it.
There's a lot of hard fought wisdom in that statement. I literally was sitting here running that over and over in my head as you were talking. That's an insightful piece of verbiage right there.
I didn't blow it. Cool.
I was worried. I was on the fence for a minute.
Yeah.
Well, David, you've been, as I said, extremely generous with your time. I just want to take a moment and acknowledge you for kind of spreading this gospel of branding to somebody like me that is a retail geek. I eat it up, and I love hearing just how much you concentrate on the why behind the brands. And I mean, your brand is a promise, I think is a very, very good place to end this interview. And I just want to say thank you for coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Adam. I really enjoyed it. You're right. The time went really fast.
I told you it would. Thanks, David.